work on your behavior. You could try harder, be more diligent, double your speed, but your efforts would only succeed in getting you to the wrong place faster. You might work on your attitude. You could think more positively. You still wouldn't get to the right place, but perhaps you wouldn't care. Your attitudes would be so positive, you would be happy wherever you were. The point is, you still be lost. The fundamental problem has nothing to do with your behavior or your attitude. It has everything to do with having a wrong map. If you have the right map of Chicago, then diligence becomes important, and when you encounter frustrating obstacle along the way, then attitude can make a real difference. But the first and the most important requirement is the accuracy of the map. Each of us many maps in our head, which can be divided into two main categories: maps of the way things are or realities, and maps of the way things should be or values. We interpret everything we experience through these mental maps. We seldom question their accuracy. We are usually even unaware that we have them. We simply assume that the way we see things is the way they really are or the way they should be, and our attitudes and behavior grow out of those assumptions. The way we see things is the source of the way we think and the way we act. Before going any further, I invite you to have an intellectual and emotional experience. Take a few seconds and just look at the picture on the following page. Now look at the picture below and carefully describe what you see. Do you see a woman? How old would you see she is? What does she look like? What is she wearing? In what kind of roles do you see her? You probably would describe the woman in the second picture to, to be about 25 years old. Very lovely, leather fashionable, with a patty nose and demure presence. If you were a single man, you might like to take her out. If you were in retailing, you might hire her as a fashion model. But what if I were to tell you that you are wrong? What if I said this picture is of a woman in her 60s or 70s who looks sad? He has a huge nose and certainly in no model. She someone you probably would help cross the street. Who's right? Look at the picture again. Can you see the old woman? If you can't, keep trying. Can you see her big hook nose, her shawl? If you and I were talking face to face, we could discuss the picture. You could describe what you see to me, and I could talk to you about what I see. We could continue to communicate until you clearly show me what you see in the picture, and I clearly show you what I see. Because we can't do that. Turn to page 45 and study the picture there, and then look at this picture again. Can you see the old woman now? It's important that you see her before you continue reading. I first encountered this experience many years ago at the Harvard Business School. The instructor was using it to demonstrate clearly and eloquently that two people can see the same thing, disagree, and yet both be right. It's not logical, it's psychological. He brought into the room a stack of large cards, half of which had the image of the young woman you saw on the page 25, and the other half of which had the old woman on page 45. He paced them out to the class, the picture of the young woman to one side of the room and the picture of the old woman to the other. He asks us to look at the card, concentrate on them for about 10 seconds, then pass them back in. He then projected upon the screen the picture you saw on page 26, combining both images and asked the class to describe what they saw. Almost every person in that class who had first seen the young woman image on a card saw the young woman in the picture. And almost every person in that class who had first seen the old woman image on the card saw the old woman in the picture. The professor then asks one student to explain what he saw to a student on the opposite side of the room. As they talk about and forth, as they talk back and forth, communication problem flared up. What do you mean, old lady? She couldn't be more than 20 or 22 years old. Oh, come on, you have to be joking. She's 70, could be pushing 80. What is the matter with you? Are you blind? This lady is young, good looking. I like to take her out. She's lovely. Lovely, she is an old hack. The argument went back and forth, each person sure of and adamant in his or her position. All of this occurred in spite of one exceedingly important advantage the student had. Most of them knew early in the demonstration that another point of view did, in fact, exist. Something many of us would never admit. Nevertheless, at first, only a few students really tried to see this picture from another frame of reference. After a period of futile communication, one student went up to the screen and pointed to a line on the drawing. There is a young woman necklace. The other one said, no, that is the old woman mouth. Gradually, they began to calmly discuss a specific point of difference, and finally, one student and then another experience suddenly recognition when the images of both came into focus. Through continued calm, respectful, and specific communication, each of us in the room was finally able to see the other point of view. But when we look away and then back, most of us would immediately see the image we had been conditioned to see in the 10-second period of time. I frequently use this perception demonstration in working with people and organization because it yields so many deep insight into both personal and interpersonal effectiveness. It shows first of all how powerful conditioning affect our perception, our paradigm. If 10 seconds can have that kind of impact on the way we see things, what about the conditioning of a lifetime, the influence in our as the personality ethic all have made their silent, unconscious impact on us and help shape our frame of reference, our paradigms, our maps. It also showed these paradigms are the source of our attitudes and behavior. We cannot act with integrity outside of them. We simply cannot maintain wholeness if we talk and walk differently than we see. If you were among the 90% who typically see the young woman in the composite picture when conditioned to do so, you undoubtedly found it difficult to think in terms of having to help her cross the street. Both your attitude about her and your behavior towards her had to be congruent with the way you saw her. This brings into focus one of the basic flaws of the personality ethic. To try to change outward attitudes and behavior does every little good in the long run if we fail to examine the basic paradigm from which those attitude and behavior flow. The perception demonstration also show how powerfully our paradigm affect the way we interact with other people. As clearly and objectively we as we think we see things, we begin to realize that others see them differently from their own apparently equally clear and objective point of view. Where we stand depends on where we sit. Each of us tends to think we see things as they are, that we are objective. But this is not the case. We see the world not as it is, but as we are, or as we are conditioned to see it. When we open our mouths to describe what we see, we in fact describe ourselves or our perception or our paradigms. When other people disagree with us, we immediately think something is wrong with them. But as the demonstration shows, sincere, clear headed pupils see things differently, each looking through the unique lens of experience. This does not mean that there are no facts in the demonstration to individuals who initially have been influenced by different conditioning pictures look at the third picture together. They are now both looking at the same identical facts, black lines and white spaces, and they would both acknowledge these as fact. But each person's interpretation of these facts represented prior experiences, and the fact have no meaning whatsoever apparent from the interpretation. The more aware we are of our basic paradigms map and our assumptions and the extent to which we have been influenced by our experience, the more we can take responsibility of those paradigms, examine them, test them against reality, listen to others, and be open to their perception, thereby getting a large picture and a far more objective view. The power of paradigm shift. Perhaps the most important insight to be gained from the perception demonstration is in the area of paradigm shifting, what we might call the aha experience when someone finally see the composite picture. When someone finally see the composite picture in another way, the more bound a person is by the initial perception, the more powerful the aha experience is. It is to a light were suddenly turned on inside. The term paradigm shift was introduced by the Thomas Kuhn in his highly influential landmark book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Kant shows how almost every significant breakthrough in the field of scientific endeavor is first a break with tradition, with old ways of thinking, with old paradigms. For Ptolemy, the great Egyptian astronomer, the earth was the center of the universe. But Copernicus created a paradigm shift and a great deal of resistance and persecution as well by placing the sun at the center. Suddenly, everything took on a different interpretation. The Newtonian model of physics was a clockwork paradigm and is still the basic of modern engineering, but it was partial incomplete. The scientific world was revolutionized by the Einstein paradigm, the relativity paradigm, which had much higher predictive and explanatory value. Until the germ theory was developed, a high percentage of women and children died during the childbirth, and one could understand why. In military skirmishes, more men were dying from small wounds and disease than from the major traumas on the front lines. But as soon as the germs theory was developed, a whole new paradigm, a better, improved way of understanding what was happening made dramatic, significant medical improvement possible. The United States today, in the fruit of a paradigm shift, the traditional concept of government for centuries had been a monarchy, a divine right of kings. Then a different paradigm was developed, government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and a constitutional democracy was born, unleashing tremendous human energy and ingenuity and creating a standard of living of freedom and liberty of influence and hope unequal in the history of the world. Not all paradigm shifts are in positive direction, as we have observed the shift from the character ethics to the personality ethic has drawn us away from the very roots that nourish true success and happiness. But whether they shift us in positive or negative direction, whether they are instantaneous or developmental, paradigm shift move us from one way of seeing the world to another, and those shifts created powerful change. Our paradigms, correct or incorrect, are the source of our attitude and behavior and ultimately our relationships with others. I remember a mini paradigm shift I experienced one Sunday morning on a subway in New York. People were sitting quietly, some reading newspaper, some lost in thought, some resting with their eye closed. It was a calm, peaceful scene. Then suddenly a man and his children entered the subway car. The children were so loud and rambunctious that instantly the whole climate changed. The man sat down next to me and closed his eyes, apparently obliviously oblivious to the situation. The children were yelling back and forth and throwing things, even grabbing people's paper. It was very disturbing, and yet the man sitting next to me did nothing. It was difficult not to feel I irritated. I could not believe that he could be so insensitive to let his children run wild like that and do nothing about it, taking no responsibility at all. It was easy to see that everyone else on the subway felt irritated too. So finally, with what I felt was unusual patience and restraint, I turned to him and said, "Sir, your children are really disturbing a lot of people. I wonder if you couldn't control them a little more." The man lifted his gaze as if to come to a conscious of the situation for the first time and said softly, "Oh, you are right. I guess I should do something about it. We just came from the hospital where their mother died about an hour ago. I don't know what to think, and I guess they don't know how to handle it either." Can you imagine what I felt at the moment my paradigm shift? Suddenly, I saw things differently, I felt differently, I behaved differently, my irritation vanished. I didn't have to worry about controlling my attitude or my behavior. My heart was filled with the man's pain. Feeling of sympathy and compassion followed freely. "Your wife just died. Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you tell me about it? What can I do to help?" Everything changed in an instant. Many people experience a similar fundamental shift in thinking when they faced a life threatening crisis and suddenly see their priorities in a different light, or when they suddenly step into a new role, such as that of husband or wife, parent or grandparent, manager or leader. We could spend weeks, months, even years laboring with the personality it takes trying to change or spontaneously when we see trying to change our attitudes and behavior, not even begin to approach the phenomena of change that occurs spontaneously when we see things differently. It becomes obvious that if we want to make relatively minor changes in our life, we can perhaps appropriately focus on our attitudes and behavior. But if we want to make significant quantum changes, we need to work on our basic paradigms. In the other in the words of Thoreau, thousand hacking for every thousand hacking at the leaves of evil, there is one striking at the root. We can only achieve quantum improvement in our life as we quit hacking at the leaf of attitude and behavior and get to work on the root, the paradigm from which our attitude and behavior flow. Seeing and being. Of course, not all paradigm shifts are instantaneous, unlike my instant inside on the subway, the paradigm shifting experience Sandra and I had with our son was a slow, difficult, and deliberate process. The approach we had first taken with him was the outgrowth of years of conditioning and experience in the personality ethic. It was the result of deeper paradigm we held about our own success as parent as well as the measure of success of our children. And it was not until we changed those basic paradigm content change in ourselves and in the situation. In order to see our son differently, Sandra and I had to be differently. Our new paradigm was created as we invested in the growth and development of our own character. Our paradigms are the way we see the world or circumstance, not in terms of our visual sense of sight, but in terms of perceiving, understanding, and interpreting. Paradigms are inseparable from character. Being is seeing in the human dimension, and what we see in highly interrelated to what we are. We can go very from to change our seeing without simultaneously changing our being and vice versa. Even in my apparently instantaneous paradigm shifting experience that morning on the subway, my change of vision was a result of or limited by my basic character. I'm sure there are people who, even suddenly understanding the true situation, would have felt no more than a twinge of regret or vague guilt as they continued to sit in embarrassed silence beside the grieving, confused man. On the other hand, I am equally certain there are people who would have been far more sensitive in the first place, who have who may have recognized that a deeper problem existed and reached out to understand and help before I did. Paradigms are powerful because they created the lens through which we see the world. The power of a paradigm shift is essential power of quantum change, whether that shift is an instantaneous or a slow and a deliberate process. The principle centered paradigm. The character ethic is based on the fundamental idea that there are principles that govern human effectiveness, natural law in the human dimension that are just as real, just as unchanging, and unarguable there as laws such as gravity or in the physical dimension. Any idea of the reality and the impact of these principles can be captured in another paradigm shifting experience as told by Frank Koch in Proceeding, the magazine of a naval institute. Two battleships assigned to the training squadron had been at sea on maneuvers in heavy weather for several days. I was serving on the lead battleship and was on the bridge as night fell. The visibility was poor with patchy fog, so the captain remained on the bridge keeping an eye on all activities. Shortly after dark, the lookout on the wing of the bridge reported light bearing on the starboard bow. Is it steady or moving astern? The captain called out. Lookout replied, steady, captain, which meant we were on a dangerous collision course with that ship. The captain then called to the signalman, signal that ship. We are on a collision course. Advise you change course 20 degrees. Back came a signal advisable for you to change course 20 degrees. The captain said, send, I am captain, change course 20 degrees. I am a seaman second class, came the reply, you had better change course 20 degrees. But the time the captain was furious, he spat out, send, I am battleship, change course 20 degrees. Back came the flashing light. I am lighthouse. We change course. The E paradigm shift is the aha experience associated with finally perceiving or understanding some aspect of the world or a circumstance in a different way. Paradigm shift experienced by the captain and by us as we read this account puts the situation in totally different light. We can see a reality that is superseded by his limited perception, a reality that is as critical for us to understand in our daily life as it was for the captain in the fog. Principles are like lighthouse, they are natural law that cannot be broken, as Cecil B. observed of the principles contained in his monumental movie, The Ten Commandments. It is impossible for us to break the law. We can only break ourselves against the law. While individuals may look at their own life and interaction in terms of paradigms or maps emerging out of their experience and conditioning, these maps are not the territory, they are a subjective reality, only an attempt to describe the territory. The objective reality or the territory itself is composed of lighthouse principles that govern human growth and happiness, natural laws that are woven into the fabric of every civilized society throughout history and comprise the roots of every family and institution that has endured and prospered. The degree to which our mental maps accurately describe the territory does not alter its existence. The reality of such principles or natural laws becomes obvious to anyone who thinks deeply and examines the cycle of social history. These principles surface time and time again. The degree to which people in society recognize and lives in harmony with them moves them towards ether, survival and stability, or disintegration and destruction. The principles I am referring to are not esoteric, mysterious, or religious ideas. There is not one principle taught in this book that is unique to any specific faith or religion, including my own. These principles are a part of every major enduring religion as well as enduring social philosophies and ethical system. They are self evident and can easily be validated by any individual. It's almost as if these principles are natural or part of the human condition, part of the human consciousness, part of the human conscience. They seems to exist in all human beings regardless of social conditioning and loyalty to them, even though they might be submerged or numbered by conditions or disloyalty. I am referring, for example, to the principle of fairness, out of which our whole concept of equity and justice is developed. Little children seems to have an innate sense of the idea of fairness and even part from opposite conditioning experience. There are vast differences in how fairness is defined and achieved, but there is almost universal awareness of the idea. Other examples would include integrity and honesty. They create the foundation of trust, which is essential to corporate and long term personal and interpersonal growth. Another principle is human dignity, the basic concept of the United States Declaration of Independence. We speak this value or principle, we hold this truth to be self evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.